three amazing people on the panel. They'll introduce themselves shortly, but let me first talk about ROI and why it's exciting for me. Because like historically, privacy has been all about compliance and preventing bad stuff from happening, and that was the ROI, which is do what we say or bad stuff will happen. But now privacy is one of many risks. People want efficiency, so we have to define the ROI proposition, and simply saying bad stuff will happen is not enough. So I would love to open with the panel first, but before we go into detail, let's have introductions. Luke, can you go first?
Yeah, I can start out. My name's Luke. I'm a privacy engineering lead at Remitly. For those who don't know, Remitly is a financial tech company based out of Seattle. The bread and butter of the business has been remittance, and we're expanding into store value and other products like lending. Yeah, so I've been on the Remitly privacy engineering team for about a year to 18 months since the global privacy program got started there.
Thank you, Luke. Saima, I'm going to go next.
Hi, yeah, thank you. My name is Saima Fancy. I'm working as a senior privacy specialist, working with the cross-section of legal data governance, architecture, and engineering, protecting health data here in Canada and the province of Ontario. From an operational perspective, previously worked as privacy engineer tier 2 at Twitter, got a bunch of certifications in privacy engineering as well. The title morphs and changes depending on where you go, but essentially this is a space I love to be in.
Thank you, Saima, and good to have you on the panel as well. Alon, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Nishant. Hi, everyone. My name is Alon, and I'm a software engineer with experience at Microsoft and Uber. And then most recently, over the last 4 years, I've been leading a team in Uber's privacy engineering organization focused on automating various privacy functions. Excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll get us kicked off. So I'll start with a very basic question. And for the audience, keep the questions and chats coming. If we see something really interesting, I'll pull your question in because we don't have a set script. So I'll keep an eye on the questions coming as well. So Luke, let's go with you first. Like, how do you think of ROI as a privacy engineer? Like, if you have a product component to it, you can basically ship features, meet metrics, OKRs, etc., right? But privacy engineering is very, very diverse. So how do you define your ROI as a privacy engineer for yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it depends on the use case. I think one thing that comes to mind is providing peace of mind internally. I think there's a lot of, fear and trepidation that can come out around how data is handled and where it is. So one thing is being able to qualify that and being able to provide abilities to make better risk-based decisions in the organization. And then I think we can also look at other things like the dollars of like how much time is going into things and automation and pieces like that. So depending on the case, I think it can be really broad, like you say.
Awesome, great points. Saima, you want to go next?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that pop up from the various experiences I've had in the professional space, specifically along the lines of data security. Some of the ROIs that leadership love to look at is, for example, cost optimization. So when you do practice data minimization within your cloud infrastructure, one of the natural outcomes from securing data via different pets that you embed is cost storage. So if we can identify redundant, repetitive, duplicated data, the natural ROI of that is data deletion retention, which in turn saves a lot of storage costs. Not to mention you're practicing data minimization, which is privacy by design principle number 1. You are enhancing data security in the cloud infrastructure. So many levels of return of investments in embedding data security tools. And at the same time, doing the right thing.
Love the sheer list of examples, Shema. That was really great. So my hope is the audience is listening in because it is not a given anymore that people think of privacy engineering as sort of a needed thing. The need is there, but we have to make the case for it because otherwise, if you do too good a job of it, people are going to think it's very easy because anybody can do it. So sometimes you got to do the job, do it well, and then make the case as to why it was important to begin with. And how do you make the case for ROI for privacy engineering?
The way I see it, it breaks down into a couple of separate things. One of them is hard metrics, especially in a growing organization. What's the level of adoption? What's your coverage on data access paths or data storage? That helps you quantify things like risk levels. And I think those trend pretty well. But the other one, which is probably harder to measure, is in a larger company, the sentiment towards privacy initiatives. If you want them to be successful, you need to make sure that you're an enabler and a good partner for the rest of the engineering and product organizations. And that really drives adoptions for these types of automations and being able to show these kind of more harder metrics down the line. So I think it's a mixture of those two.
Great. So let's kind of take a small pivot and see how do you pick the right project. Like whenever I manage teams, I got like a two-tier responsibility. First is to make sure that I pick the right things for the company as a whole, because I'm accountable to the company shareholders. But I also need to pick projects that are good for the engineers who report into me so that they get promoted, they get credit, right? So you got to find the right thing and the smart thing to be the same thing. How do you pick the right projects as a privacy engineer to make sure that you can demonstrate the impact ROI we talked about, but also make sure that the business risk goes down? How do you define the projects? How do you work with the legal teams, the PMs, etc.? Like how do you avoid becoming an engineer who simply does what's somebody sent to you, right? So, Saima, you want to go for Saima?
Yeah, sure. Really, really good question. I love to align myself with legal to start off with. One of the biggest things that is driving businesses today is making sure that trust is for front and foremost. And one of the ways to accomplish that is to make sure that big orgs, data-based orgs are complying with their internal policies and standards. If you can cause product teams and teams all across the company to accomplish that, then and only then can you be compliant with external regulatory requirements along the lines of GDPR, CCPA, and whatnot. That is an incumbent motivation and driving force right now for data-driven companies. And then once you get that buy-in, then you can get everyone to push privacy enhancing technologies, for example, and get them to embrace adoption. To me, that's a key driver.
Luke, can we try that next?
Yeah, for sure. I think it can be through a couple of different avenues. I think coming from the software engineering space outside of privacy, being able to put things in terms of risk was really important, and being able to understand, okay, we're carrying information that we don't need to. So understanding that from what that means for the organizational risk of what we have there. I think from other places, we can look at what moves the needle on customer experience, and things that might, build trust in the brand from there. And then I had another one that's escaping my mind. But looking at some of these different aspects and, figuring out what pieces make the most sense. I remember the last one. The last one is like looking at what can enable the business to build faster and move more quickly with more assurance. So I think depending on that, it's kind of weighing a bit of apples to oranges to see what makes the most sense.
Luke, I'll just bounce off a little bit of what you're saying. The other enabler for myself in the space that I sit in is working with cyber. Risk mitigation is a big piece behind data security. When you are managing something as critical as health data, you've got to make sure that data is secure from the get-go, from the point of input. And that is a huge driver. And that becomes incumbent upon all product teams to secure data. I think that's a huge driver, and that's a huge return of investment piece as well for privacy engineering.
Yeah,
it's a great
absolutely.
point. I'll jump in before I call on Alon. So Alon and I used to work together at Uber a couple of years ago, and he's a good friend of mine. And we used to work with the PM team to define products that were very customer-facing from a trust perspective, the legal team to define stuff that was for compliance, and we used to work with engineering in the platform organization to define back-end stuff to improve data quality. So a lot of diversity in our stakeholders. So Alon, how would you recommend privacy engineers pick and choose? Like you can't do all these things at the same level, and these are different tracks. How do you prioritize these different vectors coming at you across the board?
So I think the insights I've gained over the last several years is that you can only create like massive friction a handful of times before you start losing trust from your core partners. And you kind of need to pick and choose which friction you create will be worth the return. So let's say you need to choose some sort of foundational gap in your data inventory that will help you or enable you to then automate a whole host of other requirements. For example, maybe you can set one cross-cutting ask to all engineering teams to help do a one-time cataloging of all the customer PII data that they might collect. Now, you won't be able to start doing that for every single component or system within your privacy engineering platform, but maybe that one would be worthwhile, creating that friction. So then you can kind of crawl before you can walk and then run. You can use what you've kind of built to be able to then enable them seamlessly to integrate with the privacy platform, and then not have to be concerned with many other requirements down the line. And I think that's a way I would kind of pick and choose, and that's what I would pitch for first. Have some sort of prioritization of friction versus reward.
I agree with you, Alon. Choose your hard, right? Choose where your battles are going to be. But I would add on that I think it's very important to collaborate with different teams across your org. Get some buy-in, get some friends, get some allies, and then go. Then you choose which battle you want to fight, and make sure that you get enough leaders on your side. That just makes that battle that much easier to combat. I mean, if you're doing the right thing, I think the buy-in should be natural. It should happen, especially along the lines of data security, right?
Yeah, entirely. That's what I found. I have a sense that most engineers and product folks, they're aware of privacy and they want to do the right thing. They're really hungry for us as privacy professionals to enable them to do that easily. And it puts a lot of ownership on us. Once we pick and choose, we really need to make sure we're delivering high quality return.
Absolutely. And you know, the other thing is that you want to make their lives easier by bringing in solutions that make their life easy to do the right thing. So for example, automation. If you're going to bring in a tool to enhance your data security posture, for example, bring in an AI ML based tool. Don't do a regex based tool. Make their lives easy, and then teach them, communicate that to them. From my experience, that buy-in does work. And then when you have your allies with you, it works beautifully. It does minimize friction. I'm not saying it's not a battle at any point in time, but it does reduce friction for sure.
Luke, Luke, this was great.
Yeah, I think so. I think about it in terms of paid paths. You know, as we're coming to data owners with the requirement, I think teams take that idea of data ownership very, very seriously. And especially from the information security side, that's ingrained. I think I agree. They're hungry for more guidance and knowledge on the privacy side of knowing what to do. So I think any time we can come with a requirement as well as a paid path to fulfill that requirement, that's a great one.
Right. I agree, Luke. I think everyone wants to do the right thing. I truly believe that humanity exists amongst engineers and DevOps folks and all of them. Just have to communicate that effectively and give a solution. If you give the hard, give the solution with it. Don't just say you got to do it because, right? And that really works. And we are so fortunate to be living in an environment where we have so many tools available to us, right? If leadership will purchase them, will acquire them, then it's our job as privacy engineers to disseminate that knowledge.
I love the soundbite Luke gave us, come with a requirement and a clear path, because I feel like if you tell engineers something is broken, well, they're like, duh, there are 50 other things that are broken. Why is this the only thing I want to work on, right? So if you have a competition of ideas, that's a much better place to be in than to just compete with problems. So I hope Hernando can capture that soundbite from Luke. Bring to the table a requirement and a clear path. Let's make sure that gets featured somewhere in the publicity around this event. So I'm going to look at the Q&A section. There's a couple of things.
Yeah. Nishant, there's one question on data classifications. Someone's asking about AI/ML-based data classification. There are lots of great tools. One of the most important initiatives I think a lot of SaaS-based companies should undertake is data discovery, classification, labeling, and then cataloging. What that allows you to do, especially if you use an AI/ML-based one, is to generate data maps. So should there be an attack on your environment, you should be able to generate this map in an automated fashion using your AI/ML tool from end to end and know from the point the nefarious actor enters to what's compromised and who's got access along the way. There are a lot of companies out there, IBM, CrowdStrike, Centra, Sierra, Wiz. All of these folks are selling some phenomenal tools, both CSPM, DSPM, and now AI SPM as well. And all of those folks would be happy to do demos for you if you and your org are interested.
Great. So just a quick reminder for the audience, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A tab. I don't always look at the chat tab, so the Q&A tab is the one for the questions, just a very quick reminder. So I'm going to take these questions in no particular order. So there's a question on how do you realize true optimization against the changing landscape of risks and stakeholders? So how do you make sure that when you look at the risk on one side and the solution and the stakeholder on the other side, how do you pick the right combination? Because these are choices that are often a one-way door, like Amazon would say, like you cannot undo these choices. So how do you make sure that you don't over-optimize for trust or for back-end governance? So Luke, you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm not. I would like to avoid that being a one-way door with wherever possible and allow that be back and forth, especially as, on one hand, product development, there's a rising urge to make that faster and to optimize more thoroughly. And on the privacy side, there's a changing landscape of laws, regulation, and case law. So I think there's an extent where we have to be okay with a changing environment there, and come at it with some flexibility.
Alon, you go next.
Yeah, I'll follow up on Luke. I think probably the key is to focus on creating the right building blocks so you'll have flexibility down the line, and that you won't need to make that choice quite that often. I understand that in many cases it is going to come up, and you're going to have to kind of make the hard choice between the two. But you can do quite a lot to kind of push the envelope a bit further and try to tackle that less often. In the end of the day, it needs to basically be built on communication across your core stakeholders. If it's engineering and legal, to kind of pull the mill in, be the bridge between them, and come up with the best intermediate solution that has the best outcome for everyone. I think that's kind of what makes privacy engineering a bit unique, in the sense that you need strong technical understanding of the stack within your company, but then also really great communication skills to bridge the gap between more technical folks and less technical folks to come up with the best solutions.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Communication is key. Being able to disseminate that knowledge and be able to speak to everyone's languages is very, very important. And also, I think in regards to getting everyone to do the right thing, somebody in the comment put that we engineers are heroes. Yes, I agree. We are heroes. And one of the key important tasks that we have is being able to get everyone in the company to understand what compliance means. Why is it so important? And if we can automate something like that, that would be great. So for example, a lot of health tech companies have built in HIPAA compliance tools within their infrastructure. You can build up GDPR compliance tools. You can actually input your policies and standards within your tools, such that, for example, if you're doing automated classifications, you've got out-of-the-box classifiers and also customized classifiers built in already. All that just facilitates the right thing to do process, right? Which allows the buy-in to happen seamlessly.
I think the core friction happens based on when an organization starts focusing on privacy. I feel like there's many great solutions there. If it's vaults and additional security measures you can implement if you're starting an entirely new company or new flow. But usually that's not a priority at that stage of a business or at that stage of a company. So you kind of already start building privacy debt as you're going through it. And by the time you want to start tackling it, now that's where I think privacy engineering needs to come in, be a real problem solver, and then find an innovative solution to be able to enable the business given already existing difficult state or kind of data landscape within the company.
It needs to be preempted, though, don't you think? It needs to be there when the talks are happening, not after the purchase is done and it's been implemented and deployed in your infrastructure. Let's do those PIAs, DPIAs, technical privacy reviews ahead of time.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think probably we're moving more in that direction, but there's still so much privacy tech out there in many of the companies and many of the friends I'm speaking with.
Yeah, and that's where doing a lot of robust POCs comes in, right? Don't just buy an out-of-the-box tool because it looks nice, pretty, and shiny. Do some proof of concept work, and there are so many companies out there selling some amazing tools. They're willing to do the demos for you for free. Allow them to come to you, do some POCs in your environment, and then make proper decisions. Bring your privacy engineers during the POC phase versus purchase and deploy it, and then bring them in.
You can jump in, Luke.
No, I agree. I don't really have much more to add there.
Awesome. So I'll offer a perspective as somebody who for the last decade has been more of a manager at the director level, if you will. Something to think about, and I'm sure there are people on the panel who are not ICs, is how do you make sure that your engineers are not forgotten when it's time for promotion and calibration time? So you will need to make sure that there are people who benefit from your optimization who are willing to speak up for your team when it's time for calibration and rewards. So my strategy always has been make sure that you achieve the initial why. Like, why was this project created to begin with? Was it a compliance project? Was it a trust project? Try and make sure that you at least very visibly, very quantifiably meet those goals. And then at some point also make sure that optimizations happen. Now, I'm not saying this is true in every single use case. You could do optimizations concurrently as well, but don't optimize at the expense of the initial goal. because at some point there's going to be a promotion cycle where somebody's going to ask you, great, this is very efficient, but did you meet a business objective? So make sure that you think of privacy not just as a compliance vector, not just as an ROI vector, but also as a business beneficiary as well, which is to should be able to say very clearly that this was the goal, these are the numbers you're supposed to move, and here's how we move them. So just something to think about as well. We have a couple more questions waiting for the question here. So how do you distinguish between data engineers and product software engineering and data privacy engineers? So how do you, these definitions drive me crazy because every company has a different definition. So I would love to see what my colleagues in the panel have to say. Alon, you want to go first?
I think, the definition of, let's say, privacy engineer varies extremely between different organizations. In some cases, it's more of a consultant or an expert that can bridge the gap between legal requirements and technical requirements. In others, it's basically software engineers that are building essentially data platforms to enable privacy functions, like in the case of Uber. And I don't think we have a good common language to be able to differentiate between the different definitions. So probably it's good to like call out which of the disciplines you actually mean when you're talking about privacy engineering. Some of the other ones I think are quite well more established. Like I know what I'm thinking about when you're describing a software engineer or a product manager, but privacy engineer, I think that's kind of open to interpretation.
Saima?
Yeah, I agree. You know, we really need to mindfully think about this. I think we should put privacy engineering under the umbrella of data and AI governance, because that is the overarching, it's all about governance, right? It's all about data protection of your systems and your operations, compliance with legal. It's a governance role. And yes, it requires technical knowledge. It requires legal knowledge, communications, understanding that business needs to run and you need to make money. I know a lot of folks don't agree with me, but that's my take on it.
I like putting it under that umbrella. I could get behind that.
Right? Doesn't that make a lot of sense?
It does.
Yeah, it does seem so different at different companies. And I think as folks are interviewing for a privacy engineering role, I think it's really important to get to the bottom of that, because it can mean so many things. And privacy is 100% cross-cutting, just like security. So there are definitely going to be folks with a data engineer title and software engineer title who need to think about privacy, whether that or not they have a privacy engineering title. So I think there is probably a trend of folks, engineers in the privacy space, being more focused on building or at least deploying tools in a convenient way to get used there. I think that's an expanding specialization or niche to come with, software engineering background to the privacy space and provide some scalable tools there. So maybe not an answer, maybe it's more opportunities and ability to shape it in a different way that you want there.
I think
a little bit of snippet that I'll share. Oh, so sorry, I cut you off.
No, you can go ahead.
Carnegie Mellon University has an undergrad, grad, and PhD program in privacy engineering, right? So I've taught there a couple of times, and I've done my certifications there as well. What they've done is they've brought law, faculty of law, faculty of engineering, faculty of political science, and philosophy together, and now are teaching their students everything to do with data protection. All of these umbrellas, all of these things come under one umbrella. That to me is brilliant. That's mind-blowing. I mean, that's to me what privacy engineering is all about. It's an encompassing role, bringing all these disciplines, and we need to train our students from the get-go on how to articulate themselves in these 4 cross-cutting spaces. We're not there yet, though. Carnegie Mellon is ahead of its time, no doubt.
Sounds like a really interesting program.
Oh, it's amazing. I highly recommend it. I love Scilab, love Lori Craner, Norman Sade, some phenomenal professors over there. We should reach out to them.
I think one thing that's made me kind of has been very useful to me in my experience to be effective within privacy engineering is coming from the software engineering space and kind of feeling it from the other end of the equation, where I have very strict privacy requirements for, say, building a machine learning platform to help training on sensitive data. I've done that as part of my past experience, and understanding some of the friction and some of the pain points from kind of the receiving end in engineering, I think has been super useful for me as I move to the other side, trying to build solutions for those types of problems.
Yeah, that's a really good take. I appreciate that, actually. Yeah.
So down to the last 4 minutes or so, let me just ask one last question and then we can kind of wind down. If you guys could just like take it 45 seconds or less, that'd be great. So what does collaboration with engineers look like? Does it mean you whiteboard things together? Does it mean you have them tested, or is it everything on the table? When you are actively collaborating with the engineers and not just telling them what to do differently at the last minute, what does that look like? Luke, can you go first?
Yeah, I think again, I think we're trying to take a platform approach to this of saying, here are solutions for your privacy problems. Please onboard to them, and we'll make your life easier, right? So that's one part of that integration. We're also there to help, kind of on a as needed basis of like, I want a technical privacy lens on this problem I'm solving. Maybe someone is working on like a tricky ML model and is really getting into the weeds there. The way we model it is that the technical side is a second line of defense. We have more PM folks doing the first level of privacy reviews.
Next round.
When I speak to engineers, as an engineer myself, although I'm not a software engineer, I make sure that I have one or two folks from different groups, different stakeholders in meetings with me. So I'll bring in someone from privacy, someone from finance, someone from HR, depending on what's the operation that we're building out, so that it's a collaborative effort and that engineer gets viewpoints from different business units. It just makes that much more sense. And I always make sure that I bring the product manager in, not just the program manager, because the product manager will have understanding of the technical side of things too, right? It's all about communication. It's all about making sure the different languages are spoken and disseminated equally. Equity is a huge piece in this, and no one person should be put down, which happens at times, especially with engineers. They feel so siloed and pushed aside because legal is this big bad guy who kind of takes over, right? And that's the piece that we want to take away.
Alon, last answer.
I think there's two core inflection points. One is to interject at the earliest points of product and engineering design and be able to provide some sort of consulting, like a technical privacy consulting program or privacy impact assessment, to help them design their solutions. I would then use that as a funnel to identify privacy gaps within the across the company or across all platforms, and then bring them back in as stakeholders when we're designing the privacy platforms to solve those problems at scale. That's how I'd see it.
And I think that's about almost out of time here, folks. Thank you all for your great ideas. I'm sure this was a great panel for the audience as well. I'll close with one parting shot for the audience. Please define your ROI. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you. The idea that if you just build the right platform, they will reward you is good for storybooks. But in the real world here, you will make sure that you define the ROI for the audience. Your customers internally need to know exactly why what you do matters. So own it, build it, and they will follow at that point.